Here at the 7 News Digital News Desk with Watertown Mayor Sarah Pierce, as a meeting is held tonight. It's a budget workshop as the City Council goes through different budget workshops, gradually getting to a new budget. And it is the 12th of May, so there's one tonight. What time does that one start tonight?
We're starting a little bit earlier. We're going to start at 6 p.m.
6 o'clock. So that meeting open to the public where people can come and listen. No chance for people to speak, but you can learn more about the process. So good morning. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
We have that to talk about, but of course we have to talk about the state police investigation and the conclusion. Case closed is where we are with this, with the state police coming back with finding no proof or no reason to bring charges in terms of bribery or misconduct. I guess let me just get your reaction to that. I've heard it, but you've had some days to think about this now. You were pretty much surprised that nothing came back from the investigation, but give me a little bit more about where you are with this.
I would say that I was surprised that nothing came out of the investigation. Throughout the process, the investigators had said that there was a great deal of unethical conduct and that there were definitely grounds for official misconduct charges. In the correspondence that we received from the state police, they had said that, not that necessarily there wasn't any unethical behavior or anything there, but basically that they elected not to proceed with any charges. So that's how it ended up. To be honest, I'm a bit relieved that it's case closed, because now it at least gives the opportunity to speak freely about it, and what we knew, what we were able to find out through the investigation, and also just obviously for the sheer fact that now we can move on from this and get on to the other city business at hand.
If there's nothing to hold back now, what was the smoking gun to you in terms of this? And it was kind of two-pronged. It started with the bribery allegation and the complaint that former Mayor Jeff Smith made that started this whole thing. And then it rolled into looking at the golf course, right?
Correct.
So if people, including yourself, were confident that something should come out, what was the smoking gun that made you feel so confident?
I wouldn't say necessarily that it was myself who felt confident that there would be something there to move forward with. Again, this is what we were told by the investigators throughout the process, that, there's definitely grounds here for official misconduct. That's up to them, the reasons why they decided not to move forward with pursuing any charges. But I would say, for myself, the smoking gun would have been the sequence of events that happened when the golf course purchase unfolded. And not to rehash all old events, but there were numerous things that I think raised a lot of red flags for people in the community. The resistance to getting an appraisal on the property, the having the public not speak at the public session before the deal was finalized. So there were a number of things like that I think raised red flags for people and said, something seems off here, that kind of thing. And I think through the investigation, we were able to or at least I think a lot of members of the public were able to connect the dots. We know that these members of council who were in support of the deal had over 6,600 communications with an individual who received close to $2 million in taxpayer dollars as a result of it. So I think that maybe there is a little bit of vindication in that regard, that, we're able to look and see, okay, so something was kind of going on behind the scenes. Whether that rose to the level of a crime, obviously the state police elected not to pursue any charges. But I think at the end of the day, most people can agree that you shouldn't be communicating in that way with somebody if you know that they're going to benefit from a deal such as the golf course deal. I think for a lot of people, that's the big thing, is that ethical behavior for an elected official? We'll find out with the primary if they agree with people conducting themselves in that way.
With 6,600 communications, that's not unethical to have that many. You can communicate, but do we know what was in them to call it unethical? Do we know? Will we ever learn what
I
those...
think we will, because from what I'm told, the records of the investigation, including text messages, call logs, will be available through the FOIL process. So that's a Freedom of Information law. But I think that the thing that at least was concerning for me is this wasn't just 6,600 forms of communication, text messages, phone calls. This was regular communication with an individual who benefited from this deal on dates when major steps were being taken in the golf course purchase. For example, I know that the call log showed on the day that the purchase was finalized, a council member spoke to this individual 6 times throughout the day, 6 phone calls throughout the day with this individual. Well, at the same time, when the public came to speak at that meeting regarding the deal, they were told that they couldn't speak. So I think that not necessarily, phone calls and text messages aren't unethical, but if you look and connect the dots, okay, these individuals were speaking with this person before meetings, text messages during meetings, text messages during executive session, phone calls after meetings. I think, again, this will all be available, I assume, through the FOIL process, but you can kind of connect the dots. It's, one council member has a conversation with this individual, and then that council member calls the others to, I assume, share the information that was discussed during that phone call. So I think when you look at the volume of messages, when those messages and phone calls were taking place, again, during meetings, during executive session, that is at least concerning to me as mayor, as someone who is on council then, but more so as a taxpayer and an individual living in the city.
And again, just to be on the other side of that, you don't know if those 6 forms of communication in that day before a vote had anything to do with the golf course. You're assuming.
I am assuming, and I would, I am assuming, and again, that this will all be information that we're told is available through the FOIL process, so we'll be able to, I believe, see what the contents of those messages were.
Again, back to two-pronged, right? Started out with the bribery investigation. Again, state police coming back and saying no, that what was offered was not a bribe, and then it moved into the golf course. As you were getting updates through this, and you said that you were getting updates periodically from state police, when did you realize that it was making a turn, that they actually weren't pursuing the bribery charges anymore, but they were now looking at the golf course?
Hard to pinpoint exactly when I would have been given any information like that. I think it was fairly early on. They were looking at that, and of course, the allegations of bribery were in some way tied to the golf course. The individual who was accused of a bribe was involved in the golf course dealings, so I think it was all an interconnected web. And I wasn't surprised when they started to go in that direction, I guess I would say.
With the bribery, though, the alleged bribe happened with back taxes on another property, though, not the golf course.
Correct, but there was an offer for free storage of golf carts. So in a way, I guess that was interconnected a bit.
Okay, so at least that leads it into the golf course. But in terms of like state police, they come to you and say, okay, we didn't have anything for the bribery stuff, but we have some other stuff now we're looking at where the misconduct could come into play, and it didn't. No charges were brought, but that's when they said that they could come over to look at maybe misconduct charges, right? But was there any conversation where they called you up and said, okay, here's our update, the bribery stuff, not really finding anything there, but now let's move on to this?
No, they never did that, and honestly, they provided me with details, but I don't think they provided me, of course, with all of the information into what they're looking at, into what they found. Certainly, I think they kept a lot of that close to the vest, and just, I tried to do what I think any elected official should do when there are allegations of wrongdoing, just to cooperate with any questions that they asked or any information that they requested of me.
Well, the number of people that came up here from Syracuse that day for state police, I mean, it was 6 or 7. I mean, that was a lot. I mean, that was very forceful. And to make, not in a bad way, I'm just saying, but it was quite a presence to have that walk into a room and then start an investigation and have it come back with nothing.
I would have to agree, and I don't know the inner workings of the state police and what led them to not proceed with any charges. Maybe we'll learn more through the FOIL request.
Mm-hmm. Anyone doing that you know? Is the city?
I've heard of, I don't know that the city's doing anything. I mean, at least from my perspective, I haven't done anything. I know of members of the public who have made requests, but beyond that, I'm not sure of specific people who are making that request.
The other comment that you mentioned about ARPA funds being used to buy the golf course, right, and that it could potentially bring a federal investigation. If someone wanted to make that complaint, then that could bring on the federal level because federal funds. Kind of a shell game, though, with the use of ARPA funds, isn't it? Explain what you say on that, and then I'll ask my questions.
Sure, and this is something that we were asked by the investigators, and we explained exactly how it worked you won't, if you look at a list of ARPA projects, you won't see the golf course on there. The, I guess, way that I would explain it is if the city didn't have that large influx of ARPA funds that went to we were able to put in various funds for use for things like tax stabilization, capital reserve. If we didn't have that large influx of ARPA funds, the golf course purchase wouldn't have been made possible. So in a way, the large influx of those federal monies enabled the council to proceed with the golf course purchase. I mean, I know Councilmember Olney has said that a couple times recently in statements that he's put out, that the federal ARPA dollars made the golf course purchase possible. That's essentially what was conveyed to investigators.
So it isn't that the money was directly used, it was because there was money in the bank and then money went out of the bank.
Correct.
But it's not necessarily exactly an ARPA project is what
Correct.
Is what you're saying. So, and you're not an investigator, but if you were to go to the feds and say, hey, we want this to be investigated, or a complaint went to the feds and made that claim, not sure if really you'd be able to get them to investigate that if it isn't very clear where the money came from.
I'm not sure exactly. All I know is, that was, as I explained it, shared with the investigators, and they said, well, there could be a potential to make a complaint to the feds. The concern, I think, with that is if it was found that ARPA funds, whether directly or indirectly, were used improperly, there's always the risk that the city would have to pay those funds back, and that's not a situation that we can afford to be in right now.
And I guess finally, with the allegations that were made ended up being proven false, any worry over any kind of backlash from that in terms of I mean, the allegations of bribery or misconduct, now state police saying...
Well, I don't think, state police never said that anything was disproven. They said that they weren't going to proceed with any charges. So what was the question? I'm sorry.
Well, I would ask, I mean, are you worried of any liability on that? Because if the allegations didn't come back with any charges, could the private citizen involved, could the city council member sitting there, and anything coming back legally on the city because of allegations that were made out in the public?
I mean, I don't think what you're saying, I know that council members have suggested that maybe that they would proceed with some sort of legal action for slander. I don't think, right. I've never slandered anybody. I know Councilwoman Ruggiero, I think, said that we were saying that they accepted bribes. I never said that. The only thing that I've done, again, as an elected official and a private citizen, is ask questions about the golf course deal, state my opinion about the golf course deal. I thought it was in very poor ethical behavior the way that it was conducted, the way that everything unfolded, the decisions that were made, the decisions not to let the public speak, and now the information that we know through the investigation, the communication with the developer that received funds as a result of this. All of that's my opinion, not only as an elected official, but as a citizen and a taxpayer in the city of Watertown. I think I have every right to express that opinion. That's my freedom of speech, that's my freedom of opinion. And again, when you're an elected official, people are going to criticize your decisions that you make. You're not going to be right all the time. You're not going to be praised for your decisions all the time. I think people have a right to ask questions of their elected officials and to be critical of the decisions that they make. And that's all that I've done.
As you said, you're glad it's over with and you can move on to other city business.
Yes.
So now let's talk about other city business. You
Sure.
have a work session that's coming up tonight. Again, we're on the 12th of May. And the work sessions are chances for department heads to come in, meet with city council, talk about what their budgets show, what the requests are, and why they need this truck or they want this book or whatever. Tonight you have library, you have engineering, a couple of others in there, codes as well.
Bus, HR.
Anything in... Before we talk about police and fire and what has already happened, anything within these budgets here tonight that you have questions about expenses?
I think anybody who's watched the couple of budget sessions that we've had so far will see that these are very bare bones budgets compared to past budgets. There's not a lot that we can say, okay, we really don't need that this year, or we can do without this, or we can make these cuts. We have a very difficult job with this budget and going essentially line by line and seeing what can we cut, what can we change, what can we do differently to save a little bit of money. Nothing too major coming up for me tonight with these budgets. I mean, I think I have one question for the library about what we pay for security at the library. That would be one thing that I'm going to inquire about tonight, but nothing too drastic in terms of these specific departments' budgets that we'll be talking about tonight.
The police and fire have already gone through the budget process, and biggest part of the budget is public safety, of course. The police department budget was higher than the fire department, I think, for the first time ever. Doesn't happen very often if it has. Were you surprised at that?
I wasn't surprised. Again, public safety, that's the biggest component of our budget, and they're typically pretty on par with one another in terms of the totals of their budget. So as you alluded to, yes, police slightly higher, but I wasn't surprised to see that, no.
And it's tough to make cuts when it comes to public safety.
Very tough, and as you heard the police chief say the other night, I think he explained it very well, you know, what it's like for our officers on a Saturday night in the city, or really any weeknight in the city. It's a tough job with not many people to cover a place with a lot of needs.
Mm-hmm. And the cuts that, I don't want to say cuts, but the things that you may not fund or you could find in the budget not to fund, when you're talking about an 18.8% potential hike in property taxes, you're seeing things that might be $20,000 or it might be $15,000.
Right.
So really barely a drop in the bucket.
Right, and I think to kind of put it into perspective for people, every $100,000 we're able to find in savings or cuts in the budget, that's a percentage off. So in my mind, for myself, I might bring up some things that seem insignificant, small amounts, but if we can add those small amounts up to even $100,000 and knock a percentage off,
right,
I think that's a win for the taxpayers.
Last year, you had an extra boost from New York State, right? Something called Aid and Incentives to Municipalities. The acronym is
yes.
AIM. And last year, it was a surprise for, I don't know how you guys learned it, but I'm going to just pretend that you opened up a letter and it said, hey, you have an extra $500,000. I'm sure it was more technical and advanced. But you looked at it and it was like, oh, hey, this knocked 5% off of that tax hike from last year.
Right.
Where does state money land this year for the city?
From what I understand, we're getting that same influx as we did last year. So year to year, no real actual, and again, this is fairly new information as far as I understand it. Year to year, it's not going to be that similar boost. It'll be level.
So likely,
but including that boost from last year, which I believe was around $500,000.
$500,000, I think it was for last year. So that $500,000 that was new last year it'll be the same package that you got last year, right?
As far as I understand it, yes.
You worked for retired State Senator Patty Ritchie, and you know the workings of Albany. Does Albany need to put in more money, pitch in more money to AIM to help out municipalities? Because Watertown's not alone.
No, Watertown is certainly not alone, and just in being part of the New York State Conference of Mayors, NYCOM, you know, you see all the communication that goes back and forth about different municipalities that are having similar issues and what that organization is doing in terms of advocacy with our state representatives and the governor's office, and I think definitely we do need more help from the state for sure, because I think a lot of the things that cost the city and cost other municipalities, they're unfunded mandates that are essentially brought down from Albany, and that costs us, that costs our taxpayers. So perhaps we need to increase our advocacy with our state representatives to make the case for, hey, we need some help here.
So when you look at the budget, again, 18.8%, and not a lot of cuts or reductions in cost, you've looked at a couple of them, right? One of them, it's boring, I think, probably to the public, but it's a project for stairs over
Yes.
near the hydro plant.
Canal stairs, and that was in the budget, as anybody who would have flipped through it may have seen. It was a $300,000 project, so that's something that the city manager said, look, we can put this out another year and see if there's some other ways to address the need there, perhaps do something in-house, do something less expensive, so that it appears as though right now that's going to be removed from the budget. So that's a good chunk of change right there that we're going to be saving, removing that project. But there are a couple other things that came up. I know I brought a couple different things up during the fire department's budget presentation. I suggested putting off the repairs to the sidewalk in front of the fire department, the entryway at the fire department. Needed things, but do we need to do them this year?
And they're really small, right?
Small,
For cost,
small. And then I had brought up with DPW's budget, perhaps eliminating the couple message boards they had in there, which are relatively expensive. I think if I refer to my notes here, I think they're about $30,000 each, I believe. So I said, is there an opportunity here to share resources with the county or with the state? Do we need these two message boards? So really, I'm at least from my perspective, I'm trying to go line by line, find even these smaller savings that hopefully will add up to bigger savings. And
Newell Street as well.
I was
is
just going
another
to
one,
go there.
right?
That could be a bigger savings.
That's $7.5 million of a construction project.
Correct.
Underground and above ground. Make
Correct.
it pretty after you make everything new underground. That's $7.5 million. The idea, you were
that
saying?
we kind of talked about at our last budget work session when engineering presented was, could we reduce the scope of this project, perhaps just to take care of the critical infrastructure, not address or not add in some of those improvements at this point in time, your sidewalks, your trees, those sorts of things. So just take care of the critical infrastructure and perhaps address those other ancillary additions to the project in the future.
Why is the infrastructure so important to repair down there? Is it some problems when it
It's
rains a
aging,
lot?
and 25% of the city's sanitary sewer runs through Newell Street. To just put that in perspective,
Okay.
that is a very important artery in the city, and
Gotcha.
to make sure that
And you've had
is
problems
maintained. Yes.
with at least one private building
Yes.
down there
Yep.
at the apartments. So if you take away the stairs and you find a couple of other things and you get maybe 3, 4, 5%, there are others on council that want to just up that because of zoo funding. They want zoo funding to be put in the budget. So really, you're back at
Correct. Well-
that's 375. You're looking at maybe 4% on the tax rate there. So how do you feel about the zoo funding?
Glad you asked this question. I spent some time this past weekend kind of putting together a proposal for my colleagues to take a look at, because I assume that the topic of zoo funding will come up. Tomorrow we discuss DPW, so Tuesday, or not DPW, excuse me, Parks and Rec. I assume it'll come up during that discussion. But it's something that I've talked about for quite some time now, is reimagining the zoo. I don't think, and I've said this a number of times, that the model we have currently, it's been great for a number of years, but now and into the future, I don't think it's sustainable for the long term. The zoo has done, the best that they can, I think, especially in the past year, with trying to make ends meet and improve their programming. But I think looking forward, it's not feasible for the city of Watertown to meet that request from them for $375 annually.
$1,000.
$375,000, yes, thank you, annually, with an increasing amount in the out years. From what I've been told, the county is not going to be providing additional funding, so that kind of exacerbates the situation. So I think, from my perspective, it's time to change course and, again, reimagine that area where the zoo exists now. Hopefully have the zoo board and volunteers still play a role, but again, I kind of took some time over the weekend to put together a bit of a proposal for my colleagues to look at and the public to look at, weigh in on for.
Tell us about it.
Sure, okay. So essentially it's, as I said, a reimagining of the zoo, that property. What I've kind of outlined is taking that main building, which is the welcome area where people would go into the zoo, and making it what would be a Thompson Park Welcome Center, Welcome and Conservancy Center, I think is a suggested title or suggested name that I had put out there for it. But having it be, as the name suggests, a welcome center for Thompson Park, so some place where people could go to learn about, hey, what does the park offer in terms of trails, different amenities, splash pad, pool, playground, etc. what's the history of Thompson Park, perhaps some exhibits, and then some conservancy environmental focused exhibits there, hands-on. So essentially, it would be similar to nature centers at Wellesley Island, for example, much smaller scale. You still have those components of education, conservation, and ideally what I would see happening is we would have the city, again, take over operation of it, but have a board similar to, whether it's a zoo board or Friends of Thompson Park, perhaps there's a new board that's created that, does fundraising, hosts programming, educational events for children, that sort of thing. Basically, taking some of the components of what we have with Zoo New York right now, perhaps some of the smaller exhibits stay, whether that's reptiles or trying to think what else is smaller animals, smaller exhibits, so you still have that animal environmental conservation piece, but just on a much smaller scale, like they do at the Nature Center at Wellesley Island, or there's a couple other examples I've got in my proposal too of successful models where this has worked.
So the larger animals, larger exhibits wouldn't be part of what you're thinking of?
Correct.
So there'd be a cost to the city for some of that, right? For what they could say decommissioning?
A cost to decommission, certainly, but that would be a one-time cost that we would incur. As it stands right now, there's a very significant cost when it comes to maintenance, deferred maintenance, things that need to happen up there in order to have the zoo continue forward with those big exhibits.
If you have that welcome center, it doesn't look good to have empty buildings behind it, though, right?
Correct. So in the plan, I
yeah.
have proposals for the different buildings as well. So there's a building on the property that the zoo refers to as a conservation center. So I would, in my plan, envision that as those exhibits kind of staying. There's exhibits in there, again, with those smaller animals. And there's some educational exhibits about DEC careers and things like that, if I recall correctly. So those would stay. Those would kind of be the place where people could go and just, with their families, check those things out, see some of those smaller animals firsthand. I would propose keeping, the offices there. I don't know exactly what the offices would be used for, perhaps something, obviously city-related staff, if we had a staff member who was overseeing this part of the park. But the classrooms would certainly, I would imagine them staying in their current configuration, and that's what could be used to host the educational programming, that sort of thing. And then, it might be kind of a idea that would take some legwork to make happen, but we have the house there. That could be the start of, perhaps you rent the house out. Part of the component, again, in the proposal that I'll share it with you, I'm going to send it out to everybody once I put the finishing touches on it, but is generating some revenue through rental of these spaces. So whether it's the pavilion that's there, renting that out for small events, weddings, et cetera, I could see that being used for that purpose. And then the house that's there, I'm not sure exactly what the extent of the work that's needed to get that up to snuff, but that could be some sort of rental property for the city. Maybe someone wants to have a family reunion and have that be home base. They could rent that. We could rent that out. And then I also put another suggestion in the proposal for the children's zoo that's there, the petting zoo that's there. Perhaps that could be leased out a couple times a month, or not even necessarily leased out. Perhaps we could engage a local farm to come and bring some of the animals, do it a couple times a month. People can come with their kids and see some of the animals, similar to, a petting zoo, but have it happen a couple times a month. So there's a lot of ideas in it. Again, I'm going to put the finishing touches on it this morning, but look forward to sharing it with everybody and getting feedback from the community.
Sort of sounds like the city, right now it's run by the Conservancy, the zoo is, but the city coming back in and is taking over, a little bit too harsh of a term, but I mean, if you're
I wouldn't want to say necessarily taking over, because again, I don't want to have it sound in that way, because I think this is going to be a collaborative effort. I think the city, yes, would, for all intents and purposes, take that property.
Take the management, right? If you're going to take the revenues and all that stuff, right?
Take management over, but work with a board who could oversee the programming piece of it, educational piece of it, that sort of thing. Again, I drew a lot of my, inspiration for this proposal from similar partnerships that exist. So again, the Minute Anthony Common Nature Center on Wellesley Island. the state owns that facility. They have a Friends of the Nature Center board that does their fundraising. They have a couple big fundraisers throughout the year. They have programming, some of which is free, some of which they charge for. But at the end of the day, just moving forward that mission of conservation, environmental protection, that sort of thing.
A longer interview here today, but a lot of stuff to talk about. So appreciate it very much. So
Thank you.
Good topics.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching.